let me keep talking about the interview series. And I must tell you that there was little debate about who should be the subject of our first Heritage interview. The Langs are not only an integral part of AAPOR, but and winners of the AAPOR award, our highest award for lifetime achievement, but also have been honored by virtually every professional society with awards. But they're really the personification of the AAPOR spirit. At lunch today, Jack Ellison made the following comment. He said, Kurt and Gladys Lang are a single footnote. Virtually all of their work is by Kurt and Gladys Lang. And I thought that really exemplified, personified our feeling for them. Let me quote from their book, Television and Politics, which, by the way, is its fourth reissue. Third reissue. A little plug. They said in this book, we prefer to take as our unit of analysis the collective reaction to an event rather than the cognitive structures of individuals. And what that meant is that as political communication theorists and researchers have delved into so many of the important events of our society, whether it be Watergate, presidential debates, MacArthur Day, and so much more, and used their perspective as political communications theorists to explain reaction to those events. In television and politics, the Langs drew on their highly detailed study of voter reaction to election news to assess its effect on turnout, on candidate strategies, on legislative initiatives. They have been involved in so many areas of our discipline, and their latest work, interestingly enough, is Etched in Memory, where they used their significant skills to study the rise of painter-etchers from the 1880s to the 1930s. And the research question they asked was, what did some artists do to increase the probability of their being remembered? Why did some artists, particularly many female artists, disappear from view, even though they were prominent at the time? So their interests, the research interests and the research methods are quite varied. But nonetheless, the end product has contributed significantly to our understanding of communication. Let me mention a word or two about the AAPOR Heritage Interview Series. This is the first, we hope, of many. AAPOR's history, its 57-year history, is very rich. And the purpose of the Heritage Interview Series is to systematically identify and interview individuals who have made important contributions to our profession and preserve and archive those interviews for use by future generations of AAPOR members, and hopefully, by the way, for use in our revamped website, which we hope to have up next fall. Members of AAPOR are invited to nominate individuals whom they feel should be interviewed as part of the series. There's a committee appointed by the AAPOR president and reports to the AAPOR council, which will select the interviewees for the series. Let me turn the floor over now to our two interrogators. Jack Ellison of Columbia University and Kathleen Frankovic of CBS News. And we're going to ask Jack to offer the first question.
When Mark asked me to take on this assignment, to interview the Langs, I jumped at it, partially because I've never read any of their books. It gave me a chance to do that. So I have a few of mere television politics, one on Canada, polling pollsters. There are 17 pages worth of it. Not of books, but in his CV and the equivalent number for Gladys. I found it very dangerous to read. I think I read the one first on, yes, television and politics. I also read one. As in MacArthur Day, very put our various articles together. And so what we did is strung them together, and we wrote the, connecting passages. And then the problem was, how could we sort of link it all together? And in the last edition, we tried, I think for the first time, to be a little bit more systematic. And Mark, you quoted, one of the sentences out of there, which we never really tried to be, because we were always somehow too involved in doing the research, and not only doing the research, but in the events themselves. I mean, part of the fun and insights that I think we gained from our work was not only as researchers, but as participants. I can't claim that we're always absolutely objective, but then one of the ways in which we try to get around our own subjectivity, so to say, is to check it out against others and try in some way, reconstruct the structure of events and introduce the concept, as we talked about this afternoon, namely the refraction of events. In other words, the way the communication process refracts events as they are seen from certain perspectives. That's why we call the subtitle for other study is the unique perspective of television. I should suppose a more modern term, up-to-date term, would be discourse analysis, but we sort of eschewed that. Anyhow, that's basically what we try to do is somehow look back, pull together a series of studies that are in and of themselves disconnected, and we also left out.
You always use the word we. Sometimes there are really two footnotes, Mark. One is Kurt and Gladys Lang, the other is Gladys and Kurt Lang. How did you two get together in the first place? How did you meet, and what started off this particular relationship?
We have a different picture than I
Well, I know one of you will give it the first draft and the other will edit it.
I'll have the last word.
We met at University of Chicago, where we were both working on our PhD after World War II. And we did not start out to work together at all. Kirk's interest was he was working on what was to be a thesis on what's the year?
The 1944 Putsch of German generals against Hitler.
He was working on that, and then I was taking an advanced seminar with Tom Shibatani from somebody else, and it was on crowd behavior, which was my interest. We were written on collective behavior, on riots, and crowds, and people likeness, and all this sort of thing. And we, in the center, again, because we were always together, we decided he wasn't taking the course, but he would come and sit in on it. And sometime around that time, we found out that Roger was coming to Chicago, and there would be a parade, and he would be in the university area. And we all expected that there might be a riot. Basically, we started out to study crowd behavior. And of course, Kurt decided he wanted to be in on it too. And so we organized with the students, just our fellow graduate students. We all got together, and we outlined a way to observe what was going on at different points along the parade route and the downtown and the Soldiers Field and so forth. And so we both got into that together. There were really a wonderful bunch of people who worked on that, and each person was really giving a report on their own observations in whatever area they were. And what happened was at that time I guess 7 months pregnant, 8 months pregnant. I'm not sure. But since we expected a riot, I didn't think that was the best place to be. And we had no, you have to realize how new television was then. And we didn't have television sets of our own. We were able to borrow a television set. And I and two other people watched it on television. And this is, I'll make it short, but this is what happened. And the thing that we noticed was that when, at the end of the, was anyone in Chicago at that time, or remembers it? Of course you were. And at that point, as the camera, caught the whole crowd at the end as MacArthur moved on, I thought, my God, it looks like a mass of people, and they always seem to be pushing, and they're so forth. And at that point, Kurt called, and I said, "Are you all right? Are things okay down there?" And he said, "Why?" There's nothing going on down here. You people on television will appreciate that. And so that's how then what we decided to do when we wrote it up was to write it in terms of the television perspective versus the whole idea of being there. And that's where we started. We worked on that together. Kurt ultimately used his work on the German generals for his master's degree, which he didn't have at that time. And I was working on something else. I was working on adult feminine roles. I was ahead of my time at that time. And so we found ourselves with 3 theses, and we divided it up so that I used what I later on used the political conventions, which came the next year in 1952. I used that for my doctorate. Kurt used the MacArthur Day for his doctorate, and he finished the year before I did.
Find out what he first said to you when you first met him.
I'm going to jump in here. I think you need to clarify something. You weren't 7 months pregnant when you first met.
I was not. Did I say that? When MacArthur came to town.
Well, you worked on the German generals. Now, not many people have done studies in this group on German generals. Kurt, you were born in Germany.
Right.
And tell about the kind of circumstances under which you were born, what your father did for a living, what kind of town you lived in, what kind of school you went to, and when did you come to this country, and why did you come?
Well, to simplify it, I don't quite remember what happened when I was born, but I've heard about it. But I grew up in the western part of Berlin, which is now the American, or had later on became the American occupation zone. And my father was a physician. And I think one of the things that Jack is suggesting I sort of talk about, that my parents were sort of involved in a, you might call it sort of a once-a-month meeting society in which a number of people that had some renowned psychologists participated, and it was sort of loosely speaking leftists. I think one of the people was, in fact, Alfred Adler did, and they have an autographed copy to my mother, who's not a psychologist and so on, dedicated to her, and a few other people. Otto Ruler, who wrote that psychoanalytic biography of Karl Marx, he was part of it, and they were all going to combine, Marcuse was already, he was not part of it, but there were some links over in that direction.
He dated your aunt.
Huh?
He dated your aunt.
Yeah, he dated my aunt, but my aunt wasn't part of that circuit. I don't think she liked him very much. But in any event, so I grew up there. Then, of course, in 1933, a lot of things changed very quickly. And we moved to a much smaller apartment because the Jewish physicians were not allowed to collect from the insurance companies. So my father's practice, went from moderately good practice to practically nothing. And my father saw the way, and we ended up in the United States in 1937, and then I That's the kind of life, right, that I might say in a way immigrant children do, right? Big gulf developed between youngsters and parents. And so that became an American.
Went to high school in Brooklyn.
No, I went to high school. Yeah, well, Frank K. Lane High School is just across the border from Queens to Brooklyn, right next to the Bushwick Stadium, which at that time were the Yankees of the minor league, of the semi-pro league. And I actually graduated from Jamaica High School, which is one of the most conservative high schools that you could possibly imagine. There was one other socialist in the school, and they dumped him into the goose pond in front of the school. So I had a good sense when I argued with my teachers about politics, never quite to say where I stood and just to argue my points.
Shortly after that, you were drafted.
Yes, I was drafted
You
2
served
years.
in the infantry.
Yes, I was in the 78th Infantry.
You had some experiences following the war.
Yes,
Yes.
I took my discharge from the U.S. Army. I waived my discharge, so to say. And then my problem was, once you waive your discharge and you're a sergeant in the infantry, they want to hold on to you forever. So I maneuvered for some months managing not to get an assignment. I can tell you how to do that. I was an expert in that. When you have to report to an officer, you throw the sloppiest possible salute if you can, and that, because once I got an assignment, then I was stuck. I wouldn't have had to re-enlist in the army because I wanted to get out. Made my way to Berlin because I wanted to see what kind of political development of Germany would develop politically, how people would react. Finally managed to get a job in what was called denazification, which was a bureaucratic purge of Germans. All Germans except the really high up that wanted to work.
How old were you then?
I was, I guess by that time I was almost 21.
21. And you were going to denazify Germany.
But not all by myself.
You were assigned that job to denazify Germany.
Well, I just had a little bit of it, and yes, and I did that for about 3 or 4 months, and I got tired of it. I did not agree with the particular policy. It's not that I was not in favor of denazification. I thought it was badly done. So then I went around hunting for another job, and I ended up in a job that sounds very ominous, the Division of Information Control. And that was the unit of military government that was assigned to build up German newspapers, film, radio, and so forth. And I worked for what's called, again, it sounds very ominous, the intelligence branch. And I was a girl Friday, so to say, everything but typing. And so on, the reports would come from the field, and statistically we had, the Americans were doing surveys of the Germans, and I would get the tables, and I had to write them up. And or we would have informants in various communities, and something had translated, or would translate whatever they said into English, and I would get these piles of papers, and I had to write those up. And then occasionally we were giving assignments, to write about something like the state of German newspapers, or the thinking among German youth. And my job basically was I'd be given the raw material, and sometimes we would make an analysis of newspaper coverage, and I did the best I could, and then my superiors, they edited it and they put their names to it.
Didn't your first publication come out of that one?
No, it did not, actually. My first publication was published under a pseudonym. It was published in German, and
What's the name of that?
the name of it is, I don't know how many of you know German. It's Gleichschaltung und Ausschaltung. Gleichschaltung, it's a play on words. Gleichschaltung, it was the way in which the Nazis incorporated all voluntary and independent organizations into their political structure. And that's Gleichschaltung, you've probably seen it occasionally. And Ausschaltung is exclusion. And denazification was to exclude all former Nazis, however you define them, and that from any kind of position of prestige or influence. And so it was called Gleichschaltung und Ausschaltung, Beiträge zum Problem der Entnazifizierung, and I wrote it in German, and anyway, I got published. Under pseudonym. Because as a member of the occupation forces, I would have had to have clearance from the occupation forces to do that. I was assured they would give the clearance. Besides, after 3 years in the army, I was so much against all authorities that I would never have dealt with any officers in the U.S. Army if I could possibly avoid it.
Gladys, I know that when we spoke earlier today, you said that your early life was quite different from Kurt's. But at the same time, I took away from our conversations that there were many similarities in your slightly later life in terms of the role of World War II in your development as a researcher. So could you just bring us up to sort of this point in time from when you started life in Atlantic City?
I'll try to be a little bit brief because you'll all get very tired of listening to our stories of our childhood. But I was born in Atlantic City. I was not brought up in a middle-class family. My father was very proud of being a working-class person, and he was very active in the union, and he taught me he was a union person, and he was an AAPOR man, and he of course thought that the CIO, when it came out, that was a great evil. He also, at the same time, was interested in sports. He was a boxing manager, and he a lot in Atlantic City. A lot of people, a lot of fighters came there, and so forth. I met Pipo Canera when I was a kid, and he gave me his boxing gloves, which unfortunately are lost someplace now. And I used to go to boxing matches with him and so forth. He would let me go until almost the last round, and then ask me who was going to win. But at any rate, I went to a grade school that was considered a very rough grade school. I mean, but compared to what grade schools are now, it was not rough. And the one thing that I did find, contrary to what other people said, that of course I was first in my class and all this sort of thing, and people were very supportive. I think I was the only one probably in that whole, in my class that ever went on to college.
Your wartime work like? Because Kurt did wartime work. Infantry, you also related kind of work. Tell us about that.
Well, this was years later, of course, but I went to the University of Washington for my master's. I had gone to the University of Michigan for an undergraduate. But then I had a chance after the war broke out actually to go to Indiana University to teach. And that was because everybody was going off to war. I felt that it wasn't right for me to go and take their place. And so what I did do was I went to Washington, D.C., and I had done a study from Margaret Mead for the Committee on Food Habits, and ultimately, first I went with the Office of War Information. I worked for 4 months in the radio section of the Bureau of Intelligence, in case any of you people knew about that. And there we were working on how the radio was handling messages that the government wanted to get out, like save tin cans, that sort of thing. And we did a very nice study on that, really. We did studies, one that was called the enemy on radio. But that part of the Office of War Information, that is, I'm sorry, OWI, that part of the OWI discharged after 4 months. And what we had is we had a group of really lively, intelligent, recent graduates, and didn't want to let them all out of the market at the same time hunting for new jobs. And I had been active in the union at OWI. We peddled these papers around, and someone spotted the fact that I had worked on the Committee on Food Habits, and I got a call, and I didn't know where I was going, and I ended up in OSS. And I ended up in the...
Spy.
That's right. I ended up in the economics section there, where we were working on trying to find out and do things about the agricultural, the food, how much food people had and so forth. Well, at any rate, after some time, about a year or so, I suddenly was asked if I'd like to go to England. And of course, I was very happy to go to England. A lot of fun to go over converted banana traders, things like that. And I was supposed to go to work on a food country, Britain, US, UK, I think the other was France, which they were doing a study on food habits, working. But without going into the reasons for it, I got over there too late for that. I'll suffice it. What happened next was that they sent me down to Italy, and from there I also was working on studies of food supply and also black propaganda and so forth. And then I didn't really work on any surveys at all.
Surveys. Most of the people in this room do surveys. Most of the people in AAPOR do surveys. You folks don't do surveys. You've done a few, but basically not. You've used surveys, yes. You've used surveys, but you don't do surveys. You do public opinion research.
Yeah, we talked about this on our way out after we left you. We started going through and saying, what surveys have we done? We never had much money for surveys. That is, I mean, if we did them, we usually have managed to find some kind of way to do them.
Well, as Kurt described it to me earlier, you did think what you could do on the cheap.
Well, we didn't have any money for them.
So therefore you did more profound work than the survey people. I see.
I think Jack is asking a question which is actually a pretty interesting one, which is, what do you rank as, how do you rank the importance of the work you've done to the discipline? And
Not the surveys, but to public opinion.
Well, we work on public opinion, and surveys are one way of getting answers to questions about public opinion. And if a survey serves our purpose, then we would do a survey. That's
not what you're known for. That's not your strategy.
I mean, I think I'd put it slightly different. You're probably going to argue. I don't think that we ever really thought of ourselves as people who specialize in public opinion. I think that if you look back, what is allowed to our own biography, is a lot of things, they just happened, and we reacted. As Gladys mentioned before, we went out to the streets of Chicago to study mob, crowd, behavior, mass hysteria, whatever you want to call it. Everybody went out and was disappointed. Nothing happened. The study was a flop, and so on. So we salvaged it. And what happened? We salvaged it, and suddenly we became experts in political communication. We hadn't thought about it that way. And so once you're in political communications, you've got next thing that happened to political conventions. Now, how did you study political conventions, without somehow spilling over into, public opinion? But I think, I don't know whether you agree with me on this, but I think we never, except as far as joining AAPOR is concerned, never thought
in order to get that, we were studying what is being televised and inferring the effects, and then we also did a follow-up study of that by using surveys. One of the people who worked for that was David Broder, who was a student at the time. You know. No, I mean, I agree. We don't think of ourselves as survey researchers, but if it's needed, that's what you use, and we certainly make a lot of use of them.
I don't think anybody else thinks you're survey researchers. You did do a survey, though. You did poll Paulson's.
Yeah, that was
What was
just a
that
couple
about?
years ago, yeah.
Tell about it.
Well, we were sitting at the Wilson Center. We had a sabbatical, and I think this has always happened. Then you think of what would be interesting to do, and we were going to do some things on the effect of polls on the political process. And I think we had too many other things that we got sort of sidetracked on, including the book on etching, so we didn't work as hard on it as possible. But then one thing that struck us, and this was it was in '89, that all of a sudden you had this proliferation of political polls over the past, 5, 6 years or so. And we thought, as a sort of a first step, let's find out what's going on there. And so we got on the computer, designed a questionnaire, and sent it out, and decided we would ask the pollsters, what we're doing. That's how that happened. It's not a perfect study, and as I said to you this afternoon, if you don't have any money and so on, then you have to have some ideas and do something that hasn't been done before. And because then even if it's badly done, there's no precedent against which you can compare it. And that's a strategy that I would advise all young scholars to follow.
I'm going to jump in here because I'd like to point out that Jack and I brought with us a totally different set of books that the Langs have written. I have The Battle for Public Opinion, which is about Watergate, another in a series of studies about major political events, debates with the MacArthur Parade, conventions, etc., and voting and non-voting, which I'm sorry, has a survey in it. And this is a book that's very close to my heart because it's the implications of broadcasting returns before polls are closed. And it was a study that was conducted in 1964. It was done by the Langs. It was done, actually, it was funded. It was quite seriously funded by the networks. And
Yes.
by a network. I guess, was this unusual in your career?
I tell you one thing, how that came about, Kathy, when we heard that they were going to be doing the broadcast of the returns for the first time, we thought it would be a good idea to do a study of what would happen. And we went to Joe Clapper. You all know who Joe Clapper was, I take it. And at the same time, Harold Mendelsohn, in fact, he got the idea of doing a study of that returns. And then what happened is that Joe Clapper decided that we would both do studies. And then the survey work was actually done with Wally Block. He has a great big AAPOR thing. That was about the only, and so he was out in California because we were going to do the late returns. The best place to go was to California. So that's how that came about.
Gladys, let me make one correction. Do a research part, too.
Oh, you're right. Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
Of course, right.
Remember, we worked together.
Oh, right. I know. I know that. Yeah. And
I can tell you the results of the study.
Well, the book that I can't put down is Television and Politics, which is a revision of a book that you did called Politics and Television. And added a whole new chapter, introduction to it. And the reason is because it goes counter to what people think television is all about, at least what it's supposed to be a window to put people in the place where they are, where they couldn't otherwise be. They're there. you are there. Remember who's that, CBS? You are there.
Ed Merrill.
Ed Merrill, you are there. And your point is, you're not there. You're where the television people are there, and they see things, and they point their camera at stuff, and whatever is there is refracted through them. You're not saying they're biased. You're saying it's just refracted through them. So we are sitting at home, see what they want you to see, or what they come about seeing. Is that the way you would put it?
Well, I wouldn't quite say what they want you to see, but I think, they're different participants, they all get a slice of the action. And so on. What happens is somehow a joint product, and so on. There's discourse, there's interaction between the television crews and the politicians. Like the politicians trying to get their own messages across, their audience reactions, so on. There's the limitations of technology, and all of these things together. It reminds me, there's a little study that Hadley Cantrill, I think, once did. They saw the game. Nobody knows anything. It was a football game, I think, between Princeton and Dartmouth, and so on. The Princetonians saw one thing, that happened there, with a little bit of right. And